So we've been here in chapter 13, right in the middle of a section of teaching with Jesus teaching by the sea. In chapter 13, verse 1, we're told that he was there as great crowd gathered around him. And then he began teaching in parables. We've looked at the parable of the sower. Jesus then talked about why he was teaching in parables and then interpreted the parable of the sower. And now we have the next parable in this section, which is the parable of the wheat and the weeds or tares. Various translations have that in different ways. But let's read then 24 through 30, verse 24 through 30, the parable here. Someone read that for us.
I will.
Thank you, Martha.
Another parable he put forth to them, saying, the kingdom of heaven is like a man who sowed good seed in his field. But while men slept, his enemy came and sowed tares among the wheat and went his way. But when the grain had sprouted and produced a crop, then the tares also appeared. So the servants of the owner came to him and said, Sir, did you not sow good seed in your field? How then does it have tares? He said to them, an enemy has done this. The servants said to him, do you want us then to go and gather them up? But he said, no, lest while you gather up the tares, you also uproot the wheat with them. Let both grow together until the harvest. And at the time of harvest, I will say to the reapers, first gather together the tares and bind them in bundles to burn them, but gather the wheat into my barn.
All right. So the parable of the wheat and the tares, and a tare evidently is a weed that basically seems to resemble wheat when it's young. So that is part of the background here, is that they are similar looking. And so this answers two questions in regard to these weeds, is where they came from and what should be done about the weeds. So this parable depends on identifying some of the people in the story, as we'll look at the interpretation here that will come up. But who in the story is the householder?
Is God.
God, yeah, that seems to be the way that the interpretation we'll see is. So we have to identify the householder as God. The field then is what?
The world.
The world. So we have the world. We have good seed and the weeds, which are what? The good seed would represent what?
God's word.
Could be the word. Can also be seen as so the word, and then what grows from that word would be the faithful believers. So the good leads to the faithful, and then with the weeds, of course, is the wicked. The enemy that comes in is whom?
Satan.
Yeah, he is old Satan, right? And then we have servants and the harvest, and we're going to see that has to do with angels and the judgment. So this is a judgment parable. So a farmer, he's so concerned about the wheat, and he doesn't allow the field to be weeded. And the reason is he's going to wait till harvest, because the harvest is the time to gather the grain and burn the weeds. Until then, the weeds and the wheat, it all grows together, and the day of the reckoning is delayed. Why is it that the day of reckoning, why is it that they wait till harvest to take out the weeds?
Day of judgment.
It is the day of judgment in the interpretation. What is the reason in the parable that he says that he doesn't want to gather them?
Weed might be uprooted also.
Yeah, he doesn't want to take the risk of uprooting the faithful at the same time. So it's interesting. He doesn't want the wheat to be messed up. So there's something about the wheat that could be uprooted if we begin to gather them before their time. So this parable, it's similar in some ways to the one that came before it, the parable of the sower, because it does concern sowing, it concerns reaping. But unlike the sower, we have basically, instead of the four kinds of soil that was focused on in that last parable, here it's the two sowers and the two kinds of seed. So it's the seed that is the focus here, and whether that seed is good or bad. The presence of the weeds comes from the farmer's enemy, and it says the enemy came while he was sleeping and sowed the tares, sowed the weeds. And the weeds don't actually appear until the same time that the good seed does. So they all appear at the same time, and the opposition doesn't appear until the good seed is already bearing fruit. So the servants are puzzled by all this in the parable, and so they wonder, where did these weeds come from? Was it the farmer's fault? Did he sow some bad seed? And the farmer knows what the servants don't know, because he says it. He says to them, an enemy did this in verse 28. So he knows that the bad seed was sown by his enemy. And then that's when the servants offer to remove it, but they should wait, he says, because they don't want to uproot any of the wheat. At the harvest, he will tell them at the right time to gather first the weeds and then bind those into bundles to be burned, but gather the grain into the barn. And so it's kind of an interesting thing, because the house, one of the things that this does is it actually reverses what the common practice was. The common practice was gather the grain first, and then so that it's not damaged. So you gather all of that first, and then you clear the weeds that are left. But this is a departure from usual practice. And so that calls for our reflection. And so something that is curious, and it makes us wonder, why does he do that first instead of the usual practice of taking the good first? And we'll kind of see in the interpretation how this kind of plays out in the explanation of the parable that's coming up later on in the chapter. But this is certainly a parable that's focused on what we would call the end times or judgment, kind of the end of the age. And this is about the types of parables that Matthew is actually going to talk about in some other places. We think about the sheep and the goats. It's going to come up later on. The same thing about the judgment. And there's this separation that will take place, but it doesn't take place until the judgment. And in all of these, we'll see that at the end of the age, the idea is that the Son of Man will come with his angels. He'll sit on his throne in glory, and then he will judge the righteous and the wicked. And so we'll see how that all plays out. So at this point, all Matthew gives us is the parable, and then he does this thing which he has he did a little bit with the parable of the sower, is he waits to bring the interpretation till later. And so we'll kind of pick up the interpretation when we get to that. But do you have any questions on the details? We'll focus on the interpretation when we get to the later part of this chapter. Any questions on the details or observations that stick out to you, or something that is like, oh, that's interesting?
What I found interesting was that if you pull out the tares, that you might uproot some of the wheat as well. And I'm having trouble processing that.
And that's an odd thing in my mind too, that reasoning. And I think that is an odd thing, because does that mean the faithful, what is it about the faithful that they would not be able to withstand the weeds being pulled out? I don't know either. Is it that they need time grow in their faith, that they need time to keep their roots strong. I don't know. That's a hard part of this parable for sure. Any thoughts on that? Because I think that is a curious detail.
Just
The
that,
wheat, the
the
tares
sower-
would be deeper rooted than the wheat. Because
So-
the wheat was sowed in the field, but the tare seed were already, well, someone came and sowed them, I guess, but weeds usually have deeper roots than grain that's sowed.
That's an interesting.
Do if you yank up a weed, you get some of the,
I do notice when you
Good
get,
things
you get a
with
lot
them.
more than just the weed usually.
yes.
Yeah, the sower knows he sowed good seed in good soil, and he wants to give it time to mature and ripen and produce fruit. So he doesn't want to take a chance on damaging it by taking the tares out too early. He can distinguish the good fruit, the good plant from the bad fruit when it matures better.
I think there is you wonder too, and this would be one possibility too, in that, not that in a parable, it doesn't work this way, but by giving that time, does that give time for those that are, in a sense, the evil? Because what this comes up to is this is a parable that's about the separation between the good and the evil. Does that give time for those who might be considered wicked to become, in a sense, faithful? Is there grace in that? I guess that could be part of it too. And also the fact that what you said, I think, Porter, that the farmer knows the difference between the weed and the wheat, and so it doesn't matter whether he deals with it now or deals with it later. He's going to know the difference, and I think that part is
And
that.
it's also a building of faith for the good seed, because it's kind of reverts back to the soils, the crowded soil, the soil that was, the good seed was in soil that was crowded out by worldly things, is what the parable was teaching. And it just makes the good seed develop their faith more.
Takes me back. It takes me to a verse where they have faith in the mustard seed.
Well, that's the next one coming up. Well, not the faith of the mustard seed, but a mustard seed is in the next parable here. So we're gonna talk about that.
I would really like to think about the tares being there in hopes of, in coming to faith later. But unfortunately, as I read it, though, it sounds like the focus is on the good wheat being uprooted.
Yeah. That seems
I-
to be the reason. Yeah.
But I'm in favor of the other first.
But the problem is only a miracle could change a weed into wheat. But hey, God is possible, right?
Amen.
So that is it is an interesting detail. We'll think about that too as we come to interpretation a little more. Let's look at so in between the interpretation, we have the two small parables here in 31 through 33. So let's read about these two parables, the mustard seed and the leaven. So 31 to 33. Someone could read that.
I'll read it, Matthew.
Thank you.
He told them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, which a man took and planted in his field. Though it is the smallest of all your seeds, yet when it grows, it is the largest of garden plants and becomes a tree, so that the birds of the air come and perch in its branches. You want me to do the other one?
Yeah,
here?
33 too. Yeah.
He told them still another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like yeast that a woman took and mixed into a large amount of flour until it worked all through the dough.
Thank you. So we have the parable of the mustard seed. It is the third parable that actually has to do with sowing so far in this chapter. The mustard seed is a plant that was native to Galilee, and there are a lot of different variations of plants, but mustard as itself really does start out as the smallest of seeds, but it becomes the tallest of herbs. So it's one of the tall. A tree might be some of the stuff I was reading on it might be a stretch to call it a tree sometimes, but it is a plant for sure that it grows. So it's an herb. And the claim that it is here is that it starts out small, right? But it becomes large. And so that's what's really being emphasized. The parable of the mustard seed, there's 3 acts, and they're all the principal verbs that we see. So the first verb that we see, it's like a mustard seed, and then a man took and sowed. So the first act is the sowing of the seed. The next act is it was the smallest seeds, but when it had grown, so it's growth. And then the last part is that the birds came and rest in its nest and its branches. They nest in its branches. So the emphasis here is on the growth, right? It's the growth of the mustard seed. We don't really have reflection on anything about the farmer or the person who sowed it. It's all about the growth that is emphasized. So the contrast here, insignificant seed, giant shrub, and so the dynamic power of the seed is kind of that dynamic power of the seed is being compared to the kingdom of heaven. And so the kingdom of heaven is like that, is what this parable is saying. It might look small and it might look insignificant, but it grows into something that is much more consequential. And when you have the tree with the birds coming into the nest, that really it reminds us of some of the Old Testament references to the kingdoms that were compared to great trees. We see that Daniel uses that when he talks about Babylon as being compared to a tree. Ezekiel also uses that. But I think that allusion there that to say that just as those kingdoms were compared to a tree, so now the kingdom of God is being compared to a tree. And the birds are interestingly specified as what type of birds?
Birds of the air.
The birds of the air. Yeah, so they're specifically birds of the air or birds of heaven. So you can see both of those translations. And so the word is actually the same word where it says kingdom of heaven, and then you have the birds of heaven. So birds are an image in much Jewish literature for Gentiles. Now, it's not clear if that is an intention of saying this is going to grow so big that it allows all the nations to come, but it is possible that that it's there. Regardless of whether that illusion is intended or not, the point of even the birds coming is to emphasize how strong and large the mustard seed has grown to become a large plant that is able to allow birds to come into it. And so the contrast there between the present and the future, the contrast between the small, insignificant, and the large and very significant that even provide shelter and a place to nest. Then we have the parable of the leaven. Again, he says the kingdom of heaven is like, so he's comparing the kingdom of heaven to leaven. And what is it that is emphasized in the leaven parable?
Pervades everything.
That is what's happening. So again, it's that little bit that then goes out into everything. And so you see how these two parables really are probably set together, because they both have this contrast between what it starts out as and what it leads to, and that it starts out as something small and then it's transformed. And leaven, it has this mysterious transformative power. As it says elsewhere in the Bible, Galatians, a little yeast leavens the whole lump. And so the woman puts the leaven in flour, but there's a weird verb here that actually is here when it says that the woman, in some translations, it says that my translation says she mixed in 3 measures of flour. Do you have, what verb do you have there for what the woman did in verse 33?
Mine says hid it
Yeah,
in the
and that's what I
flour.
was wanting to say, is that this is a weird verb because it's not just, she didn't just put it in there, she hid it. And that's the literal word, is that
Yeah, and
she
she
hid the
mixed.
flour,
or she
which
did
that's a
what?
little odd detail. Why would she hide leaven?
Mixes.
And why in flour? And it's a lot, actually. It's about 50 pounds, 15 gallons
In games.
or a bushel. And it's a lot as well. So it's an interesting thing of how much she made here. A large amount of flour. I think part of the emphasis is how much flour can be leavened by a small amount. I think that's part of it. But is the woman also baking for a feast by baking that much? Does that mean that maybe the kingdom of heaven is leading to this great feast as well that she might be preparing for? Not totally clear on all this, but this whole parable is, again, doing what parables do. It's trying to tease our minds. Just like the mustard seed, once it's sown, the leaven mixed in the flour leads to an inevitable effect. And just as the mustard seed provides a place for the birds to nest, the leaven results in a meal. And I think this leaven and that verb hiddenness might say that the leaven is an image for the hiddenness of the kingdom. That it's sometimes it looks like you can't really see it. It seems it's so insignificant, but that it is indeed at work, and it is growing, and it is permeating, so that all will be impacted by that kingdom.
It wouldn't work if you just left the leaven on top or something. You have to mix it in
Yeah,
or
but
hide it.
yeah, and hide it. It's just a weird idea of the word
Yeah.
hide opposed to the word mixed, because there is a verb that could have been used that could have been
Yeah,
mixed.
mixed
It
it
is
in
an
instead.
interesting thing. So yeah,
Hid
it
it.
wouldn't work, because it actually said it means to be put out of sight, to hide it. The word, so this is the actual word, and you'll in Greek, and you'll notice that in English you'd understand the word encrypto. So it's like to encrypt something.
Mhm.
Any yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm wondering about the significance, if any, for the 3 parts.
Yeah, 3 measures, 3 parts.
Mhm.
Uh-huh. Any thoughts on why 3? The word 3, the word is sata. Yeah, sata, SATA. It says that a sata is 3 measures would be about a bushel, but other than the size of it, I don't know, because it just a large it's a large portion of flour, but I don't know beyond that. Any other thoughts on that?
Just the Trinity.
Yeah, it could be something to do with that if we look for some deeper thoughts.
My other thought was for the Jews, the Gentiles, and then the people who don't ever come to faith.
Yeah. So that the kingdom goes out to all and impacts all in that sense. Yeah. And so whether the believers that the Jewish and then the Gentile believers, and then those who choose not to accept it, but all are in some way touched by this kingdom.
They also could have used squid because of the 3 wise men.
Well, that's possible, huh?
Because I always got it up, Mose.
Yeah. Actually, we don't know how many wise men there were, the Magi, but we know they brought 3 gifts, right? So
Yeah, that's what I meant.
gold, frankincense, and myrrh. So verse 34, in 35 talks a little bit about Jesus's use of parables. So let's just talk about that. Verse 34 says, all these things Jesus spoke in parables to the crowds, and he said nothing to them except in parables, so that what the prophet said might be fulfilled. I will open my mouth with parables. I will proclaim what has been hidden from the foundation of the world. So Matthew does a couple things with this statement. First of all, he's saying that Jesus is talking in parables, and the reason that he gives is that it's fulfillment of prophecy. So this is a big Matthean or theme of Matthew. I guess Matthean is the adjective. That's the adjective for my name. Now I can say that's a Matthean thing when I do it. Okay. But this is what he says, is that he is quoting here from Psalm 78:2 is the quotation in 1335. And what he is saying is that the reason that he is speaking in parables is not to hide, but to make clear. You see that? I will proclaim what has been hidden from the foundation of the world. That term hidden, it's not the same word as in crypto, by the way. It paraphrases the psalm and connects that quotation with the parable of the leaven, though, because this something that is hidden and then revealed. It's the same idea that Jesus is kind of maybe alluding to these ideas that came from the Old Testament, that where it says the secret things belong to the Lord our God, but the revealed things belong to us and his children forever to observe them. So that even in the Old Testament, God was revealing and showing to his people so that they might know about him and understand his purposes in the world. And so now Jesus is continuing to do that, and he's using parables as the way in which he is revealing these truths. And so, although it seems sometimes that Jesus is hiding things by parables, and we had that, it's interesting because you have that contrast, because earlier in this chapter, he'd already quoted the Isaiah one, right? Where, what does he say in that one when he said, Isaiah chapter 6, right? That they'll hear and not understand, they'll see and they won't be able to perceive because their hearts have grown callous. But what he did in that Isaiah one was, but he said that they might turn and be healed. So that in a sense, what he's doing with these parables is hoping and giving them the hope that they will turn and be healed, and that they will gain the understanding that he wants them to have. That in a sense, these are not being encrypted, they are actually being revealing truth to those who have understanding. It's the way that I think Jesus said, and this was right before that phrase when he said, come to me, all you who are heavy laden, as he said that he was speaking the things and revealing to them the things that have been hidden from the wise and the intelligent. And so in a sense, Jesus is using these parables not to hide, but to reveal the nature of his kingdom. I will proclaim what has been hidden from the foundation of the world. So any thoughts on those two very short verses, but gets to the two things, is the reason Jesus is speaking parables and the fulfillment of prophecy.
That's sort of like what he says in verse 11. Also, he answered and said to them, because it has been given to you to know the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven, but to them that has not been given.
Right. It's like an insider knowledge that if you are part of the kingdom and you're following Jesus, then you will understand this. And if you're not, then it doesn't make sense. And so you have to have, and what I would say is you have to have this Holy Spirit in our age. It's the Holy Spirit that helps us to gain understanding, and only those who are in relation with Jesus and part of the kingdom are the ones who are able to understand that Jesus is using, in a sense, parables as a way to speak insider language. And so if you're inside, you'll get it. And if you're outside, you're not going to understand. In the next section, Jesus actually interprets the parable. So we had the two parables of the mustard seed and the leaven, and this explanation of why Jesus is speaking in parables. And now we're back to, okay, let's interpret this. And we're going to see that Jesus leaves the crowds and he gives the interpretation to his disciples. So let's read then verse 36 to 43. Someone read that
I
section.
will do it. I can
Thank
do
you.
it.
Thanks, Pauline.
Then he left the crowd and went into the house. His disciples came to him and said, "Explain to us the parable of the weeds in the field." He answered, "The one who sowed the good seed is the Son of Man. The field is the world, and the good seed stands for the sons of the kingdom. The weeds are the sons of the evil one, and the enemy who sows them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the age, and the harvesters are angels. As the weeds are pulled up and burned in the fire, so it will be at the end of the age. The Son of Man will send out his angels, and they will weed out of his kingdom everything that causes sin and all who do evil. They will throw them into the fiery furnace, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Then the righteous will shine like the sun in the kingdom of the Father. He who has ears, let him hear."
Thank you. So here we see Jesus coming into the house. His disciples actually are the ones who asked for the explanation of the parable. This is the only the second parable and one of only two that actually we have the full interpretation. And so this parable of the weeds, of course, and the parable of the sower was the other one. And so in each element of the parable is unpacked by Jesus and his explanation. So in verse 37, the one who sows the good seed is the Son of Man. We know that the Son of Man is the way that Jesus refers to himself within the Gospels. And so Son of Man then indicates that Jesus is the one who is both coming and sowing the good seed. So he's spreading the word, but also warning of judgment, because that's what he does in this section. And he also is the one who actually at the end judges between the good and the bad. So he's both the one who shares and spreads this the seed, but also the one who separates the good from the bad. The parable is concerns the world, so it's a cosmic parable, and it's the arena. The world becomes the arena of this struggle between good and evil, between God and the devil. And we have, of course, the devil pictured in the parable as the enemy, and he's the one who sows the weeds. And it's very much a dualistic kind of parable. There's good or there's bad. You're on one side or the other, and there's no neutrality. I think that's something that Matthew emphasizes quite a bit, is that there is no neutrality. You're on one side or the other. And so the parable divides humanity into two categories. So he calls them, let's see, the two categories are what? Verse 38, the children of the kingdom or the children of the evil one. So again, one or the other, sons of the kingdom or sons of the evil one. Your translations might have evil or evil one, just like in the Lord's Prayer, where it can say, deliver us from evil or deliver us from the evil one. It could be interpreted either way. So there is that. And then we have
One has the wicked one,
wicked
the
one. Okay.
wicked one.
Yeah, so wicked. So the then the judgment is likened to a harvest. And so that's something that actually is a pretty common metaphor for the judgment. And we saw that early on in John the Baptist when he talked about the separation of the wheat and the chaff with the one who would come after him. We know too how Matthew is going to have this kind of idea of the harvest a couple different times later on in his gospel as well. Then in verses 40 to 43, the interpretation really focuses on the end of the story that Jesus told, and it's focused a lot on the judgment. So it's at the harvest happens when?
At the end of the age.
Yeah, so it's the end of the age, and this is the time then when the weeds are gathered and they are burned in the fire. So that's what Jesus says that will happen at the end of the age, that the weeds will be gathered and burned in the fire. And what the way that this will happen, who is it that's gathering the weeds within this? Who are the reapers within Matthew, Jesus's interpretation?
Angels.
Angels, yes.
Angels.
So the angels are sent to do this, and they are the ones who gather, and they take everyone who causes sin and who practices iniquity or lawlessness. So all those there. So they come with the Son of Man, and they gather all those who cause sin, and then what they do with them?
Cast them in the furnace of fire.
Yeah, so there's this fiery furnace. Fiery furnace, if we're knowing from the Old Testament, might remember what fiery furnace.
Daniel,
Yeah, Daniel in the furnace. So you think about that there's kind of a reversal of fortunes here. Daniel, the righteous, not Daniel wasn't the one, but the three Hebrew brothers.
Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego.
That's right.
I just needed a chapter, kind of.
So you think about that, it's the reversal kind. The tables are turned. The wicked are going to suffer the punishment that they had once inflicted upon the righteous. And so it's certainly put in terms that would make you want to avoid that outcome of the fiery furnace, of the weeping and the gnashing of teeth. And so I think there's, in some sense, that concern of Matthew in the way in recording this interpretation and Jesus giving this interpretation is that he emphasizes the extent of this punishment so that the hearers are warned against being people who cause sin and who are lawless, who live in that way. And then there is the blessing of the righteous, and it is described as what?
Shine forth as the sun in the kingdom of their Father.
Yeah, so they are received into the kingdom, and they will shine as the sun. Interesting that is the way that Jesus shines in the transfiguration. So they will shine like the transfigured Jesus. And this is certainly a vision of blessedness that is given here. And then Matthew ends with this call to hear and listen. So everyone who has ears, let them hear what is being said. Kind of listen up, because this is really important, is what Jesus is saying in this interpretation, because there is, Jesus says, judgment, there is punishment, and so being on the right side, in a sense, is very important. Being among the righteous, as opposed to being among the lawless and those who cause sin, is a very important thing. And so there's this definite contrast between the eternal hope versus the eternal damnation. So which one? It's putting before us two paths, and I think the call to listen is what is there, is that we would pay attention to that.
Hmm.
Do you have any thoughts on that interpretation of the parable? The interesting part is I don't think it answers a lot of the questions that we had. It certainly emphasizes the contrast between the weeds and the wheat, but it doesn't answer why does it wait until the end, and why does he deal with the weeds first as opposed to the normal way? So interesting. But do you feel like any of those other questions were answered, or other thoughts that you might have?
Well, I don't know why I don't go picking as soon as they come.
Yeah, get rid of those weeds, huh?
Yeah, because you'd think a gardener or a farmer would go pick the weeds.
Yep. He just lets them grow.
Yeah.
Anything else on the interpretation here? All right, let's look at the next section of parables here. This is 44 to 50. We have a section here. You could read that.
I
I'll
will.
read it.
Oh, okay.
Bud.
Okay. The kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field, which someone found and hid. Then in his joy, he goes and sells all that he has and buys that field. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant in search of fine pearls. On finding one pearl of great value, he went and sold all that he had and bought it. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a net that was thrown into the sea and caught fish of every kind. When it was full, they drew it ashore, sat down, and put the good into a basket and threw out the bad. So it will be at the end of the age. The angels will come out and separate the evil from the righteous and throw them into the furnace of fire, where there'll be weeping and gnashing of teeth.
Thank you. So we have these parables that are introduced with the phrase, the kingdom of heaven is like. And so we have actually three parables here. The first one is treasure, the second is the pearls, and the third one is the net. So there's interesting too, the first two seem to emphasize the same thing. The third seems to be similar to the parable that we just had an interpretation for, and all of these have connections with other things that we've seen so far in Matthew. So the first one is the treasure, and what are we told about the treasure?
Hidden in the field.
So it was hidden, and it's hidden in a field, which a lot of these parables have been taking place in a field within this section. But he is there, hidden in the field. But the emphasis is not that the treasure is hidden. What is the emphasis on?
That it was found.
It was found, but when he finds it, what does he do with it again?
Hid it.
Yeah. And then what?
He goes and sells all he has to buy the field.
So he sells all he has and he buys it. So what's the point?
He was greedy.
Sounds like he was real greedy.
He wasn't going to tell anyone about that he was buying it and that there was hidden treasure there, was he?
No.
He sacrificed all he had for what he wanted.
There you go. I think it's the value, right? The
Yeah.
value of of that treasure was so significant that he gave everything he had for it. And I
Yeah.
think that's the emphasis here, is the all surpassing value of the kingdom. If the kingdom of heaven is like this treasure, then you're going to give up everything you can, everything you have to give up in order to obtain this treasure. So I think that is the point here. So if he would sell everything to acquire earthly treasure, how much more should we be willing to give up for treasures in heaven?
Depends on what, oh, if it's the one in heaven, I'd give up everything.
And that's the point, is that we're to give up everything for that. The second parable is a slight variation. So we have the emphasis here is on a pearl. Pearls themselves were valuable commodities. So we have they were precious commodities, but they're also easily transportable. So in this parable, the man is actually seeking fine pearls. So he's a merchant that is looking for good pearls. But what does he do when he found one?
Sold everything and bought it.
Yep. So that is just like the parable that we had before, where the man who found the treasure goes and sells everything he has. Here's the same thing. This merchant goes and sells everything he has in order to buy it. And so the focus again is on the value and the urgency of giving up. And it's, notice how they do it, like it's a very urgent matter too, that they sell everything in order to acquire what they want. And so the emphasis here is the urgency of sacrificing to acquire the thing that is of value. And if the kingdom of heaven is like that, then you must be willing to sacrifice in order to gain the kingdom.
It's like saying the kingdom of heaven is worth anything you're willing to pay for.
That would be absolutely what it's like. Yeah, that's what this is saying. In both of these two parables, that seems to be the message.
That's like telling my brothers and nieces and nephews, look, I die, I'd give you everything in my room.
Yeah. So the third parable is slightly different from the first two. So it actually turns to the theme of judgment. We start with this one. The kingdom of heaven is compared to what?
A net
Net.
cast into the sea.
Net. Yeah, and this was the word. Some translations have a dragnet. It was the largest nets that would have been used by the Galilean fishermen. So it had floats on top and weights on the bottom, and it would be a net that was set out by a boat. And the men on the shore would then draw it in with ropes attached to the corners and keep it in motion so that it enclosed the fish as they drew it in. So this is about that net that is driving. We have some. So he goes, the kingdom has like the dragnet cast the sea and gathered every kind of fish. But then what do they do with the fish?
Kept the good and threw the bad away.
Yep, they keep the good and they throw out the bad. And so separating the good and the bad. It's interesting that so here's just a little trivia for you. They say, historians, that there are about 18 species of fish in the Sea of Galilee. But Jewish law that said this: whatever has fins and scales is clean. But if it doesn't have that, then it's not clean. And so catfish were excluded. And so they would often separate out the good and the bad based on what was clean and unclean. And so fish couldn't be there. And so it doesn't seem to be the issue of whether the fish are spoiled or not. It seems to be whether they would have been considered clean or unclean, because they're all fresh fish. So they just caught them, so they wouldn't really be spoiled. So the parable then is comparing the separation of the fish to what?
People.
People, and to what will happen to people?
Oh, they'll be separated and the bad will be cast in the furnace, and the same thing that happened to the wheat and the tares.
Yeah,
and
it's the exact same
everything
thing, right?
else.
It's the exact same thing. It is the coming judgment that is emphasized. And by the way, who is it that's collecting the people?
Angels again.
Angels. Yeah, they're the ones that are going to come and separate them. And then they're actually throwing them into the lake of fire. So
Oh,
But-
it's a lake fire.
but interesting that just as the parable of the wheat and the tares, you have the wicked are in the midst of the righteous. So that's another kind of parallel there between these parables. And so whether it's the wheat and the tares, the clean or the unclean, the good and the bad, it's this idea of separation. Again, we have the furnace of blazing fire, which is emphasis on hot, very emphasis on a very extreme fire. And then gnashing of teeth is the wailing and gnashing of teeth. The gnashing of teeth could be different things that are cause one's teeth to be gnashing. It could be if you're angry, it could be if you're cold, but this seems to be an emphasis on the great pain that is involved and punishment. So the fate of the wicked is really described in very extreme terms. And I think the reason that Matthew and records these extreme terms that Jesus used was because he wants to impress upon us all the urgency of sharing in the blessing of the righteous rather than the fate of the wicked. This is trying to help us understand how important it is to seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and to bear the fruit of the kingdom. Any observations on these this trio of parables? So 2 parables on the surpassing value of the kingdom and 1 parable on judgment. Verses 51 to 53, we have Jesus makes a statement and finishes these parables. Someone read 51 to 53.
I will.
Thank you.
Jesus said to them, "Have you understood all these things?" They said to him, "Yes, Lord." Then he said to them, "Therefore, every scribe instructed concerning the kingdom of heaven is like a householder who brings out of his treasure things new and old." Now it came to pass when Jesus had finished these parables that he departed from there.
So interesting little kind of interaction here. So he's talking to whom in this section?
His disciple.
Disciples. That's right. That goes back to verse 36. So he's been talking to the disciples. And so he says to them, "Have you understood these things?" And they say, "Yes." And then Jesus makes this statement: "Every scribe trained for the kingdom of heaven is like." So interesting that usually he says the kingdom of heaven is like. Here it's a scribe that is trained for the kingdom of heaven. It's a unique term in Matthew, but it seems to be indicating that maybe not all scribes are bad. We've seen scribes within Matthew's gospel previously, and some indications that the scribes were in collusion with the Pharisees and they were bad scribes, but there are some indication that there might be positive scribes. And so this could suggest that there might have even been scribes that were part of Matthew's community and part of the early church. And so I think the fact that there are those who scribes that did become part of Jesus's community might be referenced here. But either way, he says that the scribe of heaven is like what?
A householder who brings out his treasure,
A
Thing-
householder.
new
Yeah.
and old.
So they're like a householder and they bring out treasure. Well, that would you hear my Melissa must be having fun. My smoke alarm is going off. The scribe that is trained for the kingdom of heaven, the catchword here, treasure, ties up to those parables that we just had as well. So they draw out of the treasure both the new and the old. What is it that you think is talking about with this new and the old?
The New Testament and the Old Testament.
Could be new and Old Testament. Any other thoughts? So one of the other places where we've seen a contrast between new and old in Matthew's gospel, do you remember the new wine and the old wineskins? So you have that idea as well.
Big deal.
So you can't there you have the saying about putting new wine into old wineskins, lest the wine be lost and the wineskins be ruined. But both the old and the new have value. And I do think that what he's talking about, whether you say New and Old Testament or the teachings of the Torah, the teachings of the Old Testament, and the teachings of Jesus, I think that would be kind of what it's saying here, that both of those have value. So both the old has value as well as the new. And so I think this is saying that these scribes that are faithful scribes are people that draw from both the scriptures and the teachings of Jesus and interpret from both. And that, again, Matthew is emphasizing within his whole writings of his gospel that he is not throwing out the old, but that he sees Jesus as the fulfillment of the old. And so the old have value because they are still pointing to Jesus. And if we interpret them through the lens of Christ, then we have the full understanding of what they are saying to us. And so Matthew wants us to not throw out everything, but he sees there's value in the old, but you must have this new as well. And so it's not enough just to have the old, like the traditional scribes. You also have to have the teachings of Jesus. But it's also not enough, on the other hand, just to have the teachings of Jesus. You also need to have the old and understand what leads to the kingdom that becomes present here.
He said he didn't come to change the law, but to fulfill it.
Yep. That he sees himself as the true interpreter of the law. And so the way we understand the law now, and Matthew's idea would be we can understand the Old Testament because of Jesus. And so there's value with that. So let's just finish out this chapter 54 to 58. So when he came to his hometown, he began teaching in their synagogue, so that they were amazed and said, "Where did he get this wisdom and these powers? Is not this the son of the carpenter? Is not his mother called Mary, and his brothers James and Joseph and Simon and Judas? His sisters, are they not all with us? Where then did this man get all these things?" And they took offense at him. Jesus said to them, "A prophet is not without honor, except in his hometown and in his own home." He did not do many deeds of power there because of their lack of faith. And so this is kind of a little bit of a transitional section. He's just finished that teaching of the parables, and now he's going to go into a section that's focused on some various healings and miracles that are going to come up here. So this account is highlighting Jesus's rejection just after his teaching. So Jesus is here, his hometown. Where do you think his hometown is?
Ezra.
Nazareth is where most
Nazareth.
people think. So it was the village that they most think. This is Jesus teaching. Where is he teaching here?
Synagogue.
So he's in the synagogue in that city, and the synagogue would have been a place where they would gather for assemblies, and both for social and religious purposes, and they would gather to hear teaching, and so Jesus is here teaching within the synagogue. And how did they respond? The verb there in verse 54. What is their verb that denotes their response?
Mine says astonished.
Astonished. Yeah, that's right. They were astonished. And so this hometown folk are like really impressed with what Jesus is doing. They're astonished, and that does get to that. And so they asked, where? Did you notice that it's not how does Jesus do this, but it's where did he get this? And notice there's two things that they're focused on. What two things do they note about Jesus?
Wisdom and mighty works.
So both his wisdom and his deeds of power. So it's his works and his wisdom. And so wisdom and power, both of these indicating that God is with him, and his wisdom, his ability to interpret and understand the nature of God and the kingdom, and in the things that he is doing. So they asked, and so their focus then turns, well, where did he get this? And so they say, was it from his family? That's kind of like the idea, right? Where did he get it? Is it his family? And they start saying, isn't this the son of the carpenter? So they're of course focusing on Joseph and his occupation as a carpenter, and they also remember that his mother is Mary, and so they know these people. And then they focuses on his brothers and his sisters, and so they have those listed here for the various ones. So they notice that the brothers that are named are James, Joseph, and Simon, and Judas. And then you have the indication that his sisters are aren't they among us? So that what they're saying is they knew these people. And so again, then they emphasize the same question, right? Basically, they say, well, we know all those people, so he didn't get this power from them. The question is again in verse 56, where did he get all these things? And then it says, after they begin to contemplate this question and contemplate his family, what do?
They were offended.
Yeah, they took offense at him. That's a very interesting thing. So they are, in a sense, scandalized by Jesus, is the word that could be used there. They're being scandalized by this prophet who has come among them to share wonders and to share wisdom. And Jesus responds then with a proverb. The proverb he has is, prophets are not without honor except in their own country and their own house. So it indicates then that even in his hometown, they don't see, they don't hear, they don't get it. They don't understand the nature of the kingdom. And Jesus indicates, Matthew indicates in verse 58 that the whole thing, the reason that they are unable to understand the nature of his wisdom, the nature of his power, is why? Unbelief or lack of faith. And as a result of that, Jesus did not do many power there. It's interesting, and this is just an interesting difference between Mark and Matthew. In Matthew, it says that Jesus could not do any miracles. Here, it just says Jesus did not. It's almost like Jesus is choosing not to here, whereas in the other one, it's that he could not. But that is what happens here. So they then, we normally have, he did not do many deeds of power, and it says in the other one he did not do any. He could not do any, but here it's he did not do many. It's not like he didn't do any, but he was not able to, or chose not to do many because of their lack of faith. So it's interesting that usually what we see is a miracle story where they're amazed at what he's doing, but here Jesus is the one who is kind of upset with their unbelief, and that's what he happens.
Well, I think he did one, didn't he? In this where he walked away from the lynch mob.
In Luke's gospel, I think that is what happens.
Yeah,
Matthew doesn't record that part, yeah, but Luke is the one where like he's like they want to basically throw him off a cliff, right? And and he gets away, yeah, and that would be a miracle. So yeah, you got that. So that's the end of chapter 13, and next week we'll pick up with down note, the death of John the Baptist. So we'll talk about that. Any final comments or conclusions on this chapter?
It's sort of like there at the end, they were upset because he grew up with them and then now he's acting better than them.
Yeah, it almost could be seen as that, like, well, he's just one of us, and
yeah.
look at how he is. Yeah.
Who do you think he is?
Yeah, I think, who do you think he is a good way of putting it, I think. Who does this guy think he is? And it shows us that again, this kingdom, I think what it's showing us to some degree is that this kingdom can be accepted or rejected. We can choose to receive it by faith or not, and that in some sense, the people of Nazareth passed judgment on themselves because of their unwillingness to believe, and as a result, then Jesus doesn't work among them, and so we can choose whether we will allow God to work among us or not, in a sense. Which, if you're thinking about how does that tie in to the rest of the chapter, again, I don't feel like Matthew is saying that some of us are destined to be the children of God, and some of us are destined to be the children of evil. But I think he would say we could choose to be in this camp or that camp, and our choices will have repercussions of at the final judgment.
How do you feel about no choice?
How do I feel about no choice? That no one would have a choice?
No, I think many people just never make a choice.
Oh yeah, I got you. Okay, I was at the angle. Yeah, not making a choice is making the choice not to follow, in a sense, right?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, because if you choose not to do anything with it, you're choosing to reject it. I think that's why Matthew doesn't have, there's never a neutral ground. It's either you're part of the kingdom or you're not. And so choosing not to accept or receive that kingdom, to be part of that kingdom, is to reject it. Yeah. Good point.
I fear there's far too many people in that category.
And probably really the majority of people, if you think about it, right?
Yes.
The majority of the people are not outright rejecting the kingdom, but they don't really commit to the kingdom. And so that's that middle ground is where, and that's the sad state where many people live without actually making that step of faith to choose the kingdom.
Unfortunately.
Yeah. Any other thoughts? Matthew is, I will say this, right? We've read Mark's gospel earlier. We did John's gospel. Matthew is like emphasizes judgment more than the others, I would say. Is that fair? You think he really is emphasizing this idea that there is the separation between the good and the right, the righteous and the wicked.
And
He's
there are results for your choices.
the choice of how you respond to the kingdom or how you respond to Jesus. Yeah. All right. I always forget where the stop record button is. There it is.